So in Oklahoma, there is a legislator, state senator named Dusty Deevers, and I'm just gonna look aside from his name right now. He just filed a bill for the next legislative session that is so disturbing that we have to talk about it. But this is the bill he just filed. It's for the new legislature in 2025, Senate Bill 228. And basically, it's a bill allowing people to get here it is right here, letter A. This act shall be known and may be cited as the Covenant Marriage Act of Oklahoma. And if you don't know what a covenant marriage is, sit down. You're going to want to hear this. It is a big deal. But let me start with, I'm going to scroll down here. This is what he says. If you are going to get a covenant marriage, we'll talk about what that means in a second. All you have to do is sign a contract that says the following. We do solemnly declare that marriage is a lifelong covenant made before God. We have chosen each other carefully and disclosed to one another everything that could adversely affect the decision to enter into this marriage. We have received premarital counseling on the nature, purposes, and responsibilities of marriage. We have read the Covenant Marriage Act of Oklahoma, and we understand that a covenant marriage is for life. If we experience marital difficulties, we commit ourselves to take all reasonable efforts to preserve our marriage, including marital counseling. With full knowledge of what this commitment means, we do hereby declare that our marriage will be bound by the laws of the state of Oklahoma on covenant marriages, and we promise to love, honor, and care for one another as spouses for the rest of our lives. Okay, here's the thing. Other than the mention of God at the very beginning of that actually doesn't sound that weird to me, because those sound like the vows couples make anytime they get married, right? Like two people pledge themselves to each other. They promise to, work through each other till death do us part. They say sickness and in health, for better, for worse, richer, for poor. So no matter what we're going through, I'm going to stand by your side. We are going to be together till we die. That's every marriage vow. So what's the point of the covenant marriage thing? Because there's nothing extremely weird about that. And again, this is optional. This bill that Deevers has proposed says if you want this covenant marriage, you can get it. So what the hell is the big deal here? Here's the big deal. A covenant marriage, if you sign a contract saying as much, it makes it very, very hard to get divorced. And that is the point of a covenant marriage. And in fact, if you go through the bill, like when you get to page 5 of the bill, he finally gets into how you can end a covenant marriage. Page 5 of 6. Divorce in a covenant marriage shall only be granted if one spouse can demonstrate by a preponderance of the evidence, holy shit right there, that the other spouse has committed one or more of the following acts. Here's when it's okay to end this particular marriage. Abandonment, if the spouse has left you for at least 1 year without justification. Okay, that includes time in prison, just as an example. Number 2, abuse. If you've committed physical or sexual abuse, your spouse against you or your children, then your spouse can leave you. And 3, adultery. Okay, fine, but that's it. And this is where you got to start thinking about, this sounds pretty messed up, because what happens if you get married and you're no longer in love with the other person? Guess what? Too damn bad. You are stuck in that marriage for life and you cannot get a divorce. What if your partner has changed in significant ways? You were one way when you got married, but then things happen. People change. Maybe they got red-pilled. Maybe they voted for Donald Trump and you're like, I don't respect you anymore. I got to get out of here. Too bad. You're stuck. What happens if you're sexually incompatible and you only figured that out after you got married? Sorry, now you're stuck having horrible sex or no sex for the rest of your life. What if you are emotionally abused? Guess what? That wasn't an option on the list. Sorry, abuse was limited to physical and sexual abuse. That's it. Emotional abuse? Sorry, you're still stuck. And remember, it said you have to be able to prove this stuff with a preponderance of the evidence. What if your allegations of physical and sexual abuse are not believed by the government official who has to make that call? Because you'll never believe this. A lot of times, women mostly make allegations of abuse that they were victims of abuse, and you'll never believe this. A lot of men don't believe them. That happens. What happens if your spouse threatened you from telling anybody about what they did to you? So you can't go forth with your evidence of physical or sexual abuse. That's not an option. And so even if your partner commits one of the acceptable offenses, even then the bill says you have to go through marital counseling before a divorce can be granted, except it says actually in the bill, unless you're the victim of abuse or there was a criminal conviction, you have to go through marital counseling first, which still means if you were the victim of abandonment or something like that, you can only leave that marriage if you are forced to confront your spouse again in front of a third party, even if that would make everything worse. Why the hell would anyone want to do this? And I'll tell you one reason I think they might be interested in doing this, because on page 6 of the bill, here we go. If you are in a covenant marriage, you could be eligible for an amount of $2,500 as a tax credit if you file jointly, or $1,250 if you file separately. So you can get a tax break if you do a covenant marriage. That's a reason. He's given you a bribe to do this, basically. Okay, so why the hell? Given the limitations on all of this, why would anyone choose a covenant marriage as opposed to a regular marriage when, by the way, most people make the exact same kind of vows and offer the same kind of commitment to the other person? But again, all of us living in the real world, we recognize that, look, sorry, sometimes marriages don't last. I know you can pledge on your wedding day that you're going to be together forever and you're going to be there no matter what happens. But then life kicks in and some couples go through difficulties, and it's better off for them if they separate. I've very rarely heard people whose parents got divorced say, no, man, I wish my parents stayed together in that unhappy marriage. They never say that. They're all like, yeah, everything was way better. I mean, it was tough. Divorce is not easy, but why would you want to stay in a marriage or live in a house under a marriage that is not working for you? It is a good thing that we allow people to end their marriages, because usually there's a reason for that, right? But so why would anyone go through this? There's a simple answer to that. Because it's a way for couples, usually conservative Christian couples, to send a message that their marriages are stronger than your marriages. That's why this thing exists. You know, there are people out there who might say, oh, your partner asked you to sign a prenuptial agreement. That's a red flag because they already are thinking about divorce. Whereas some people are like, no, you're just covering your bases because you live in the real world and you know things sometimes happen. Like the same people who think a prenup is a red flag are the people who might say to a young Christian couple, if you don't get a covenant marriage, it's really because your partner's already thinking about getting divorced. And that's the wrong message, but that's the pressure that's going to exist on couples if this is an option on the table. A covenant marriage is nothing more than a Christian threat made against young couples. And if any of this sounds familiar, I'm sure some of you have already said this in the comments, but if any of this sounds familiar, it's probably because when Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, first became Speaker 2 years ago, people were trying to figure out, who the hell is this guy who got elected after Republicans ran out of all the other options? And when people started digging into who is Mike Johnson, it turns out he's one of the dudes behind covenant marriages. And let me tell you what happened there. In 1997, in response to rising divorce rates, conservatives in Louisiana passed a law making covenant marriages an option. And Mike Johnson and his wife, they got married in 1999. They were one of the first couples to get a covenant marriage, and they became like the spokespeople for why everyone should get a covenant marriage. And in fact, Mike Johnson was a law student who helped draft the law. And he worked with a Christian hate group leader who was a legislator to help get it passed. All right. And one of the things Johnson said, this is when he was 28 years old, he said, because so few people have chosen covenant marriage in Louisiana, it seems like an unpopular choice. It's not unpopular, it's just unknown. Once the marriage is out there, a whole lot more people will choose it. And guess what? Turns out a whole bunch of people did not choose it. I believe, according to Slate, only 2 other states passed bills like this: Arizona in 1998 and Arkansas in 2001. And fewer than 2% of married couples went ahead and got a covenant marriage. Most people, and that includes plenty of Christians, were like, no, we'll just do the regular vows. We're good. But it didn't stop Mike Johnson from doing this over and over and praising this and talking about how it was the greatest thing ever. And in fact, one of the things he said, Mike Johnson told the Associated Press he was trying to persuade all of his friends to convert their marriages to covenant marriages. When they asked Mike Johnson's wife, why did you enter into this? She said it was romantic. Which, you know what? Whatever. I do not care about Mike Johnson's relationship, his wife. If it works for them, fine. But again, the obvious problem with covenant marriage contracts is that it assumes most people enter a marriage with a foot out the door already. That is not how it works. Most people, I think, take their marriage vows pretty seriously, at least at first. You know, they have every intention of staying together forever. But the fact that no fault divorce exists, I mean, why would that bother you? Why would that interfere with your marriage if you don't think you're going to need it? It shouldn't. The fact that no fault divorces exist shouldn't be any concern to you if you have no intention of getting divorced. It's like insurance. It's nice to have in case you need it, right? Because again, you don't walk into a marriage thinking you're going to get divorced. But when you realize that's where you need to go, you're going to be glad the laws allow you to do that. And again, people don't always leave because of abuse, adultery, or abandonment. They might leave because they're unhappy, or they're not compatible, or they have a lot of very serious disagreements they only found out about after marriage. There are legitimate reasons to walk away from a relationship. Side note, maybe, like, I'm always very disturbed these days when I hear people saying, you know, my parents were married for 50 years. Jimmy Carter, he was married to his wife for like 77 years or something. And that's fine if you're happy together. But if you think the only way to define a happy marriage is by how long you're in it, that's a red flag to me, because longevity should never be the goal of a relationship. If you're unhappy after 5 years, then end the marriage after 5 years. Don't stick together because you're unhappy, right? And if you're happy for 70 years, good for you. That's nice. But the length of your marriage is not a goal to aspire to. Happiness within a marriage should be the goal you are aspiring to. And in fact, when the Washington Post covered Mike Johnson's bill like 20 some years ago, they actually pointed out that this could be bad. This is what the Post said at the time. That kind of encouragement to get a covenant marriage from pastors, friends, relatives, and of course, fiancés could constitute a form of emotional blackmail, critics contend, in which a reluctant man or woman is pressured into a covenant marriage and later resents it. Yeah, like these contracts are a form of entrapment. They're forcing you to stay in the marriage no matter what. And that's scary. Again, I don't think anyone gets married thinking about how to take the exit ramp. It's that life happens, situations change, and when that happens, everyone is better off knowing there's a way out, as difficult as that may be. So a covenant marriage is nice in theory, but it's not a great idea in practice. And I think it's especially dangerous in conservative Christian circles where purity culture norms often pressure people to get married at a very young age before they really know each other, before they even know themselves, oftentimes before they've ever had sex, definitely before they've had kids and understand what that entails. Like, if you're in a broken marriage, you should not have to wait to get abused or abandoned in order to walk away. And you sure as hell shouldn't have to air your personal laundry in a courtroom in order to get out, which is what Dusty Deevers wants them to do. And that option should be available to anybody who needs it. So, just as with abortion rights, though, conservative Christians do not want other people making choices they may not like. So, by creating a contract that sounds like a more serious marriage, a heightened marriage, if you will, I wonder how many couples are now trapped in a union they want to escape, and how many more are going to be trapped if they pass this law, pass this bill in Oklahoma. And interestingly enough, when Mike Johnson did an interview about his covenant marriage a couple of years ago, I was fascinated by this thing that he said at the time. He told hate group leader Tony Perkins, we are one of the first covenant marriages. That law that you wrote, it's worked out. My wife has stayed with me this whole time. That is not a stamp of approval. Just because your wife can't escape you doesn't mean your marriage is working. And the fact that Mike Johnson doesn't realize what he said there, that should be the idea that, man, if without this covenant marriage, my wife would have left me a long time ago. That is not the brag you think it is. That is a marriage built on paperwork, not love. And again, I don't care if couples choose a covenant marriage for themselves. It's their life, it's their decision. I do not care, but I think it should remain symbolic, and it should remain under the purview of a church, and the government should not be making people offering that option to people who want to sign a contract like this, because under the law, people should be able to get out of a marriage no matter what their religious groups say. All right. And you should also be concerned about this for another reason, even if you don't live in Oklahoma, because Republicans now have a trifecta in Washington, and Mike Johnson is still the speaker, and Donald Trump has no thoughts of his own. He does whatever Republicans want him to do. So there is a chance that guys like Mike Johnson are going to try to pass an optional covenant marriage option at a national level. I mean, if you think that's far-fetched, think about all the ways Republicans have tried to control marriage over the years. At a time, they opposed interracial marriage. They do not want to protect same-sex marriage. They want to allow child marriage. Making it harder to get divorced, that is right up their alley. And the irony that Donald Trump is on his third marriage, that hypocrisy has never fazed them at all, right? So again, it's not that anyone would be forced to sign a covenant marriage bill if Deevers' bill becomes law in Oklahoma. My concern is that the sort of people pressured to sign it are probably a lot of people who may one day be most in need of a way to break free. Dusty Deevers, by the way, tried passing a bill like this last year to ban divorces on grounds of incompatibility. He doesn't like no-fault divorce. That bill did not go anywhere. So now he's rebranding it as Covenant Marriage Bill, hoping that this time it'll work. He's also passed bills to try to abolish pornography, or at least that's a campaign promise he made. He has sponsored a bill to criminalize sexting anybody who's not your spouse. And he wants to treat abortions as homicide. And he also said if any parent uses in vitro fertilization, you are waging an assault against God. So this dude is a Christian nationalist who fantasizes about living in a theocracy, and he really doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Okay, I'm going to stop there with this story. What questions do we have about all this? I want to remove government out of marriage, not add more to it, right? Like a marriage, we don't need a marriage threesome here, but that's what a covenant marriage is. It's a three-way partnership between you and your spouse and the government, and all of you are in bed together at all times. You're right on there. It's always the party of small government, except when it concerns your bedroom, every single time. So would this override normal divorce law for those who sign up? Yup. That's exactly what it would do. You cannot get a divorce. Even in Oklahoma, you can get divorced. But if you sign this contract, you could not just get divorced unless it fell under one of those three outs, including like physical abuse or something. If you just wanted to get out, you cannot, unless your partner's like, I'm okay with this, I guess, maybe. But you're stuck. So covenant marriage is a life sentence then, a forced life sentence. And again, I just want to repeat, Heather, like marriage is meant to be a life sentence too. That's what you're signing up for. But again, stuff happens. That's how life works. Things can happen. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean your marriage was a failure either. Sometimes it just runs its course. But yes, covenant marriage is a life sentence that you go into marriage with, but that you are stuck with no matter what circumstances happen around you. And that's the problem with this. Is it harder for the wife to get divorced than it is for the man? You would think that, right? Like, no, according to this bill, it treats men and women the same. Interestingly enough, and I think I'm going to bring this up here. I wonder how they would react to a gay couple getting a covenant marriage. I found this very interesting because I thought about this too. And nowhere in the bill does it specify that it has to be a straight marriage. And I think the reason for that is if Dusty Deevers right now tried to say this only applies to one man and one woman, it would be struck down by the courts because same sex marriage is still the law of the land nationwide. And he decided not to play that game at all. So he's just saying, whatever, gay couples aren't going to get a covenant marriage. I'm just not going to mention the genders of the two people. So I'm sure he thinks gay people should not be getting a covenant marriage, but he just didn't mention that they had to be straight. So for now, if his bill passes, yeah, gay couples could theoretically have a covenant marriage too. Elizabeth says, some of us take our monogamy vows more seriously than others. Stare at ex-husband intensely. But that's the thing, right? Like you go into a marriage thinking it's going to be one way. Things happen. You decide to separate. And it's a good thing that that option exists because in that situation, even though you could end a covenant marriage in that situation, the whole point is it doesn't matter what the reason is. It's none of my business what your reason is if you want to end your relationship, other than, I don't know, I'm nosy or something. But it's none of my business. It's none of the government's business. It's between me and the partner. And if we choose to end it, we end it. That's how it should be. Maya says, Mike Johnson needs to stop telling other people how to live. I wish you were right. Unfortunately, we have at least 2 more years of him telling everybody how to live. Does the Dark Horse, thanks for that donation, says rapidly moving closer to anarchism, a la Robert Evans and communal support. Why am I not getting that reference? The US was a great idea at the time, but fuck this. I do feel that second part all the time. Like, democracy was great until the wrong people were in the majority. Or actually, I should say they were not in the majority. Trump didn't even get a majority of the votes. But all the people who should know better decided to stay home because they're selfish. They're passing this law because they don't want their child brides to be able to divorce them. And child marriages still happen in America. I think there is a lot to that. Again, a lot of the people who are going to be pressured to get covenant marriages are the youngest people out there. And again, if you're growing up in purity culture, a lot of those people have never had sex, have barely dated. Even if they do date, they're courting. They're not going out by themselves anywhere. How much do they really get to know the person they're about to marry? A lot of times, their courtship is very quick. It's almost like an arranged marriage. You don't really get to know the other person. They just seem right, so you go along with it. But again, I mean, I'm thinking back to myself, like, what? I'm 41 now. Like, if I'm like, what was I like when I was 39? Oh, right. I was an idiot. If you want me to go back to when I was like 19, Of course I was an idiot. I don't want to go back to then. And yet, for a lot of these people getting married, coming out of those circles, they're 17, 18, sometimes younger. But even if we set that aside, how much do you really know about yourself at that age? I feel like I changed so much when since I was half my age, and I am not the same person I used to be, for the better, hopefully.